All right. So welcome, Brandon. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you. We're preparing for our Fresno Fair, which starts at the beginning of October. And so we've got some people here on the call that are going to be part of that event. And just a brief introduction. Really, Brandon's kind of somebody who doesn't really need an intro, but I'm going to do one anyways. So Brandon started July 7th of 2007. So 7707. He's at 8.5 million in sales. He's had three $1 million years. That's in a row, right, Brandon? Three in a row.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then he's also had 30 100K months. So a lot of us have 100K campaigns. Brandon's done that 30 times in 1 month. He's also had multiple 100K pushes, and his best week of his career is 100K. So I feel like there's no better person to talk about handling objections using quality questions than Brandon Brown. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Denise. Hey guys, excited to have the next 30, 45 minutes with you and give you guys some goods. Good to see some of your guys' faces. If you're able to be on the live screen, it'd be great to see your face. Today I wanted to share with you guys. I have 7 steps here, and it's really the 7 steps to handling objections efficiently and quickly. And when I think of, working a big fair or any fair for that matter, is like a lot of it comes down to being able to handle the objection, handle the concern correctly, and how big of a difference that can make on your day, right? On your week, on your entire event. And so naturally, being in a sales company, we want to grow and improve every single year. And so, I have found, and from people I've mentored, the difference between an average rep and a good rep, or a good rep and a great rep, really a lot of that comes down to like their ability to handle objections. It's the difference between having like a 5K day and a 10K day. It's typically those 1 or 2 or maybe 3 orders of closing that package deal that can have such an impact on your day. The orders you don't close are typically the larger ones. And so if you take a moment to think about that, is like, well, if it's relatively common to not close the larger orders, then if I can really put a lot of focus and attention into handling objections and being hyper proficient at that, that can have a huge impact on my average order and like what I sell for the entire event. So and then the other piece to like what I want to talk about today and why all this even matters in the first place is the more efficient you are in handling objections, the quicker you can close and the faster you can get to the next customer. And we've all been in those scenarios where it's like you're working side by side with someone and, you see the third customer walk up and they're like, oh, we need a set. And they look qualified. And you're like, whoever can finish first. In your head, you're like, can get this easy walk up. We've all been there. And you've probably been on the good end of that stick and the short end of that stick. And so, you ask yourself, well, if I can close more efficiently, it's going to open me up to more possibilities, more opportunities, which is what I want to do. The last reason why all this matters, and I'm talking a little bit about the why, just to like really have you guys hone into the being as present as possible on this call, is when you think of like all the different layers of the all the different layers of the business, family program, cookware, flatware, package deals, business gifts, when you look at all of those, you have to know how to pitch each of those, right? And that's one thing. But at the end of the day, all those pitches, they funnel towards one thing, and they all have to go through a certain gate. And that gate is objection handling. It doesn't matter if you're closing business gifts. It doesn't matter if you're closing on a family program or a new customer or cookware. The same concerns, the same objections persist. I want to think about it. I need to talk to my spouse. I need to talk to my partner. I need to talk to, I wasn't planning on spending that money, right? Whatever it is. So then it's like, well, if I can get really good at that gate that everything has to go through, that's going to open up the floodgates to be able to close more. And then I just have to get better at the pitches initially. So today, right, my focus for you guys is to be able to give you tools and skills that are simple but implementable immediately, so that you can go next week or in 2 weeks when your fair starts and actually see, like, practice what I'm talking about today and actually reap the benefits of that time that you invested, not just listening on today's call, but reviewing it and then practicing it with customers. So I have 7 steps for you. And it's my belief that once you understand these steps, it will be easier for you to handle objections, and you'll be able to handle them more quickly. And that's a win for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. So we're going to dive in. Number 1, first step is you have to understand where the customer is coming from. And in parentheses, I put without assumption and agenda. So you want to understand where the customer is coming from without assumption or agenda. How many times have you been with a customer and halfway through the sentence of the customer talking, you already know what the customer is going to say? Well, if you already connect the dots before you allow the customer to fully express, that's not actually listening. That's assuming. You're pulling from your experience from past interactions and saying, oh, they're just like this person, right? When someone says, oh, I want to think about it, right? You're already gearing up for your default response to someone who says, I want to think about it, versus really listening to the customer. And you're sabotaging yourself in that process. So what I wrote down here is, you want to listen with the intent to learn and understand where the customer's coming from, because the customer leaves clues. And what if the customer's leaving clues and you're not even aware of those clues? So the next time you talk to a customer, even if it's on a service call later today, look for the clues the customer may be leaving. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit further later on in today's message. But it's your job to pick up those clues. All right. So that's the challenge that I have for you guys. Listen fully, listen deeply, pay attention to the customer's body language, pay attention to their fluctuation in their voice, pauses, pay attention to their eye contact and where they're looking, because all of those things are little hints for you to figure out how the customer is feeling, where the customer is coming from, and to point number 1, understanding where the customer is coming from. It's like an analogy is you go from 2D to 4D, right? You get way more depth, way more understanding of the situation. And understanding the situation more fully allows you to do what? Serve the customer at a higher level and really provide answers, ask questions that will help be solutions for the customer. So that's number 1. Number 2 is customers need to feel that you see them. Customers need to feel that you see them. So it's one thing to understand where the customer is coming from. It's another thing to really have the customer then feel like, hey, this person is really understanding and empathizing like where I'm coming from. So the question I have is, how connected do your customers feel to you during the interaction? And that it's a rhetorical question, but something for you to just ponder. It's like, how connected do the customers actually feel to you in that interaction? Eye contact, right? Do you make eye contact? I know people that I've worked with that like, I just have a hard time making eye contact with the customer. I'm like, well, you can break a lot of trust if you're not like making eye contact as you're talking to them. If you tend to hold your breath, right, look away, or attempt to talk over the customer, all right, you're breaking trust with the customer. So those are all things that you want to pay attention to. Are you doing like do's and don'ts? And then there's acknowledgement. That's another piece that's really helpful for the customers to have them feel like you see where they're coming from, is acknowledging them. An example of this would be, customer said, Denise is like, oh, I'm not going to use the butcher knife. And then my response is like, yeah, you will, because it's good for this, this, and this. It's like I'm completely discrediting what they just said and trying to overpower them with why they would use it versus like saying, oh, Denise is like, I'm not going to use the butcher knife. Oh, really? Why do you feel that way? What do you think it's for? Right. And then you're asking follow-up questions. And you can say, hey, I totally understand where you're coming from. There's a few other food items that you can really use this knife for that people love it for. And then you can go into that. That's just like a very small example of like ask question after what they say, and then follow it up with like a suggestion. Lead with curiosity. I use social proof and experiences to really help customers gain a better perspective of whatever their like concern is. And this can be on anything. It could be on a knife they're not sure they're going to use. It could be even on the block. It's like, oh, I would never use the block. Really? Are you sure? And I'm like testing their own conviction. Oh yeah, I would definitely not use it. How come? Is it because you don't like, and then they're going to tell you, they're going to say, well, I don't like the way it looks, or I don't have space on the counter, and I'll say, hey, I totally understand where you're coming from. I have a lot of customers that have expressed the same concern that you've expressed, where they don't feel like they have enough space on the countertop. But the one thing they actually realized was that of all the things they had on their counter, the one thing they probably used the most frequently are the knives. And so it would make sense to put the things on the counter that you're going to use the most. And so they ended up, I've had a lot of customers who had that initial concern, and they ended up still getting the block because they understood that like, I use the knives way more than a toaster, or a rooster that's there for decoration, or whatever, you name it, like whatever random thing is on the counter. So the, whatever the concern is, being able to allow them to express and explain why they're feeling that way, acknowledge, right? And then give third-party experiences or stories, social proof, to help shift their mindset. Number 3, uncover root concerns that the customer may not even be aware of. Uncover root concerns that the customer may not even be aware of. It's not always what they say, it's what they mean by what they say. So what's an example of that? Oh, I want to think about it. Okay. And most of you guys go into your default, well, like you could think about it, but people don't ever come back and blah, 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 blah. Versus, well, what did they really mean by that? What did they really mean by, I want to think about it? And the reality is the answer to that question could be like 3 or 4 different things. It really is, what did they really need to think about? I need to think about if my husband's okay if I make this purchase. I need to think about if we can fit it in the budget. I need to think about it if we can afford the knives. I need to think about it if we're going to use the knives. I need to think about if this is a smart investment for me right now. So those are all like different objections. But if you try to diagnose the general objection, which is I want to think about it and say, well, a lot of people, think about it and then I never see them again. And so what if I just did a turbo deal for you right now? Well, the turbo deal, whether it's free stuff or discount or whatever you normally do, isn't treating the actual concern, which is I need to talk to my husband, right? Or I don't know if I'm going to use all the pieces. So you're diagnosing it incorrectly. And so when that happens, right, you don't get the traction that you need. So that goes back to it's not always what they say, it's what they mean by what they say. So by you being more curious and digging a little deeper, you can actually get to the root cause. And those extra couple questions that'll take you 20, 30 seconds can save you 5, 10, 15 minutes in that interaction. A lot of times there's something underneath the concern. And so you want to figure out what the customer might not even know themselves. Like there's times where a customer is like, I'm going to think about it. And they actually don't know why. Something in them is like, I just don't feel confident in making a decision right now. It's your job to help them critically think through the concern there on the spot, not when they walk away from the booth, but right there. All right. It's like, oh, you want to think about it? Totally fine. Randy, what's the biggest thing you want to think about? Oh, well, I just don't know if like, my wife's not here. I don't know if like she would use all the knives, and it's like, okay, cool. Totally understand, where you're coming from. And then you can dig into that, right? And work on handling that concern. But the goal is to help them. Your goal is to help them uncover what the root cause is, and then together as a team, work towards a solution on that. How do you do that? Well, you got to create trust. You got to create safety. You got to create openness. You got to ask quality questions. And a lot of times you have to be very direct, If they feel that you're trying to understand and serve them versus close them, two things are going to happen. They're going to stick around longer and they'll be more open to sharing with you their concern. And that's the goal. So that's number 3. Point number 4 here is close all possible exit doors except the main concern. Close all possible exit doors except the main concern. So, Karen, just so I'm on the same page as you, right? If you really wanted to, could you fit, $450 a month in the budget? Yes. Okay, great. And do you feel like these are all pieces that you would use and you see how they would all work together over the course of an entire year? Yes. And I assume I don't need to like sell you on the value of Cutco because your family's had them for years. Oh yeah, no, I know they're great. Awesome. So the only reason why you're a little hesitant to getting it right now is, your husband's not here and you just want his like vote of approval. Yeah, that's exactly it. right? And so what I'm doing is I'm like taking all the different possible objections and just verifying there's nothing else that's behind the bush, so to speak, right? Can they budget it? Would they use the pieces? Do they see the value in it? And then from there, you can like narrow in on the one door that you need to walk through with them and make sure they get on the same page. So that's point number 4 is close all possible exit doors. So if you guys can see here, I'm kind of walking you through the steps of how to handle objections, right? The psychology behind it and the framework. So number 1 is you're understanding where the customer's coming from. Number 2, you're making sure the customer's need is feeling understood and seen by you. Number 3, you're uncovering the root concern that customers may have. So really digging a little deeper there. Number 4, you're closing all possible exit doors, right? Number 5 is you want to create hypotheticals with the remaining door. And I kind of call them like if-then statements. If this, then that. But they're hypotheticals. And hypotheticals are probably one of the most underrated tools you could use when working through an objection. Now, you guys all know well, if your husband was here, you know, Karen, and what do you think he would say? And you guys probably say that now, which is great. It's not like a bad statement to make. It's a good statement, but there's levels to it, right? So you could say that, or you could say, Karen, how long have you known your husband? 30 years. Okay. Safe to say you know him really well. Oh, yeah, totally. Hypothetically, if your husband was here, knowing that you both already know how great the quality of the product is because you've had it for 10 years and you've never had it sharpened, and knowing that, you're in charge of the kitchen and he loves your cooking, what do you think he would say? And so what I'm doing there is I'm taking the same question and I'm creating a hypothetical. So there's less obligation, which is, it's a baby step. And 2 is I'm providing more facts of the situation before she answers the question. It's like, hey, how long have you known your husband? 30 years. Great. Safe to say you know him pretty well. Okay, awesome. I know he's not here, but hypothetically, if he was and he saw everything you saw, knowing that you guys have had not the Cutco knives for 10 years, never had them sharpened, love them, and knowing that like you're in charge of the kitchen, and obviously he loves your cooking. If he was here, what do you think he would say? He'd probably just say yes. Great. That's awesome. Well, knowing that he would be fully supportive of you investing into your tools for your kitchen, something that you're going to have and use for the rest of your life. If I went out of my way and did something a little extra special just to show you that I'm working hard to earn your business, would you be open to that? All right. And so now the receptiveness of that question has a lot more potency because of everything leading up to that, right? Understanding where the customer's coming from, making sure they feel seen, right? Getting to the root, objection, creating hypotheticals. And at that point, she's going to, in this scenario, she's going to be a lot more open to that. Now, what if Karen goes, yeah, he would probably say no. I'd be like, really? How come? It's like, well, he just doesn't see the value in it. Even though we've had it for 10 years, he just doesn't see the value. He doesn't cook. He can barely boil water, so it was so hard to get him to even buy the initial set. I had to guilt him into it. I'm just creating an example here. But like, that's probably a scenario, right? Here's what I want to tell you that you're not expecting me to say, right? Is it's okay if the customer says no. You know why? Like if Karen goes, yeah, my husband would probably still say no. Great. You know why it's great? Because if she knows he was going to say no, then the probability of her going home or going down the aisle and talking to the husband or whatever it is, and her coming back is 0.1%. Right? It would be a miracle for her to come back and buy if she, who's been married for 30 years, already knows his answer. But that's super valuable information. Why? Because now, right, you can take that and use that as leverage. Be like, oh, so you'd still say no, huh? It's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad you shared that with me. You know why, Karen? Because it sounds like even if you did talk to him, he would probably still say no to something of this size of package. And at the end of the day, I would never want you to like, you know, get in trouble for like doing something that he wouldn't be on board for. Can I make a suggestion? Sure. Right. And so the suggestion is like, I know I don't need to sell you on the quality. I can tell you really want these pieces. And my objective at the end of the day isn't to like sell you everything. It's just to help you find something that you can fit in the budget, that you're comfortable with and really excited about. So can I show you a smaller option that I think would be a way more doable? And it would actually just come with your favorite pieces and just see what that would look like for fun. Sure. Right? And you drop down from an upgrade to a partial upgrade to a 5-piece, like whatever, fill in the blank. But you're now like dropping down with intentionality and for the exact reason for the scenario. And you're using that solution of a 5-piece or whatever it is as a great next move, considering all the variables. So it's like, hey, my job at the end of the day isn't to sell you everything. It's really to help you find something that you would use, that fits in the budget, and that you're excited about. Because I know you'll always come back to buy more eventually. So point number six, provide solutions that acknowledge their fears and worries. So provide a solution that acknowledges their fears and worries while bringing in emotion and logic to the reason for why they should get it right then and there. And that's what I just did for you guys, right? Is like I'm providing a solution for everything we've just talked about, Karen's fears and worries, and I'm using logic and reason for why this would be a great option. And like the logic and reason, right? The emotion is like, and so Karen, what's nice about this 5-piece option is two things. One, the price is drastically less. And two, you're getting your favorite pieces out of the upgrade. So it's literally the best of both worlds. You get what you would probably use the most anyways, while keeping the price significantly lower. And like logically, in anybody's mind, it's like, well, that's a win-win. Pay 1/3 the price, get my favorite third of pieces. It's perfect. Right. And so when you go from like a $1,500 package, right, down to like $600 or whatever it is, that's helpful, and fill in the blank. It can be in any scenario, any kind of drop down, but that's like the concept behind it. One thing I have written down here is statements and questions based around logic and emotion are the fastest levers to pull to move a customer into a close. So the faster you want to like move a customer to the finish line, using statements and questions that are based in logic, based in emotion, they can really move the needle a lot quicker. So an example of this is like, hey, Danny, I understand like you didn't plan on getting, a set of knives today, but you also didn't plan on seeing a high quality American made brand like Cutco either. So I'm using logic, right? It's like, oh, Danny goes like, I didn't plan on buying knives today. I'm like, yeah, I get that. You also didn't plan on seeing Cutco either. So it's like taking his logic and reason and mirroring it. It's like, so if you didn't plan on seeing Cutco, you can't necessarily say you were ever going to plan on buying knives. But now that you've seen Cutco, that gives you a reason to now strongly consider getting them. So it's like you didn't plan on seeing high quality brand like Cutco either. And at the end of the day, Danny, whether you planned on it or not, don't you agree that your knives do need to be replaced eventually? Tell me again, how was it when you're like cutting tomatoes or like barbecuing your tri-tip? And now what am I doing? I'm pulling on the emotion and the logic. Hey, wouldn't you agree you're going to have to get knives eventually? Yes, check. Okay, remind me again about how like crappy your current knives are. Oh yeah, they're really bad. Awesome. So considering the fact that you need to get the knives eventually and your knives suck now and we're here and it's pretty rare to see Cutco at a place like this. This event happens once a year, right? Sacramento State Fair, right? If I went out of my way and did something extra special for you, would you be open to that? All right. So the way I'm leveraging logic and emotion through that process is what's going to move the needle and move the customer to feeling more confident, more convicted in pulling the trigger. Or if Daniel goes, they're just expensive. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. They are expensive. And I agree with them. Immediately, wallet gets dropped. They're like, huh? Yeah, they are expensive. I'm not saying that they're not. But Daniel, what else can you spend 700 bucks on a month that you're going to use literally every single day for the rest of your life? And just silence. It's like, oh, that's true. And my favorite is when like the customer is like, 700 bucks a month for the complete set. That's like the price of a car. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Except it's only 5 months, not 60 months. And you'll probably have the knives longer than you'll have the car. And the knives will require way less maintenance than the car. So when you think about it, it's probably one of the best investments and returns on investments you can make with your money when you think of how much you're spending and what you're getting in return. So again, I'm using logic and reason to help shift their perspective. All right, number 7 is the close. So close with confidence and conviction. You know more about knives and more about Cutco than the customer does. So serve them at the highest level. Like close with confidence, close with conviction. Don't beat around the bush. let them feel your words, your tone, your body language. Let them feel that you're taking care of them and you're looking out for them. I have find when I speak with high level of conviction and certainty with customers, you know, they take lead. They allow me to lead in that situation versus like, oh, I don't know, like, you could do this. It's like, hey, I'm unattached to whether you buy this or not, Denise. But from what you've shared with me when you first walked up, is that your knives are terrible and you've been thinking about investing in good quality knives. Now you're right. Good quality knives are expensive. And so it's always going to sting a little bit when you first buy it. But when you think of the fact that you can make an investment like this, that you'll have for the rest of your life, use every single day, it's arguably one of the best investments you can make. So you tell me, like, is the $500 a month going to break the bank? Or if you really wanted to, could you fit in the budget? Oh, we could fit it in. Okay, cool. Even if you didn't buy the knives, are you going to buy them eventually? Yes. Okay. Can I make a suggestion? Knowing you're going to get them eventually, knowing you can fit in the budget now, and obviously I don't need to sell you on the value of Cutco. Your friends have had them for years. Like, it's a good product. It's a good investment. If I go out of my way and do something extra special for you, would you be open to that? Sure. What do you got? So the closing with confidence, closing with conviction. So that's what I got for you guys. Hopefully that is helpful, and you got some good notes that you can implement right away.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Brandon. I would like to open it up for some questions if you have a few minutes.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool.
I have a bunch of questions, but I want to make sure someone else goes first, so that way people don't say I took all their time.
Well, why don't you start with one question, and then it'll give people to consider if there's any other questions.
Perfect. First question I have is, I know Deanna, when I talked with her when she worked at Fresno Fair, she said the two people I look at is Curtis and Brandon. They're like the Albert Einsteins, the very psychological breakdown, the body language and response. And I know Curtis has mentioned at Net, when he talked about navigating customers, he doesn't really go about asking the order until he has understood they're basically ready to go ahead and get an order. I want to know if that means you guys both ask kind of soft closing yes questions till they're about ready and you could tell that the lights changed in their eyes and they're like ready to go. Or if you don't subscribe to that and you just ask the question right away and then you're ready for the objection handling and you'll take an extra 5-10 minutes, where it seems like Curtis, he, according to him, it's like he asks and it's like kind of like maybe they have one thing, but he takes 2 minutes to just bundle that up and then get them on the order.
Sure. I've never watched Curtis firsthand. I subscribe to the philosophy of that to a certain extent, in the sense that, if I know a customer isn't ready to like pull the trigger, I don't say, so do you want to go ahead and get that? And then if they're not ready, then they're just going to like coil up. Right? It's like, oh, I'm not ready. Okay, we'll just think about it. So I don't like ask the question of like, do you want to go ahead and get it? If I know they're not confident in their decision yet. And so instead of like asking for the order, I'll just continue to talk about like the product or answer any questions they have and kind of ease into it. And so that's helpful. Now, the reason why I don't subscribe to it 100% is because sometimes there's objections that are there that the customer needs to express. Like, there's no scenario, and I would call Curtis out in fact that like you're going to get objections. Like anyone who says like, oh, you never get objections if you just do a good enough demo, like customers have concerns. And being able to pull out the concerns, navigate through the concerns, and like massage through it is like an integral part to the process. And so sometimes, like, I can tell there's some hesitation in the customer pulling the trigger. And I know that the only way to close this deal is for them to vocalize their concern. From the vocalization, we can then work together to figure out what it is. Because a lot of times customers don't have the capacity mentally to work through whatever it is that they're held up on. Maybe they need to be empowered because their husband's not there and they want, they're unsure to make the decision. Maybe they need to really feel the value of the product a little bit more because it's a big investment for them. Maybe even though they can't afford it, it's past their comfort threshold. And so, you have to go into a smaller set, not that they can't afford the bigger set, but it's just it's a too big of a gap for them, and so you just got to close on a bigger set. But the customer has to communicate, right? And so it's your job to create that safe space, to ask questions, to allow the customer to like, articulate how they're feeling, so that you can like dissolve the friction, dissolve the whatever's holding them back. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does, but it brings up a piggyback. If you're presenting the price page right there, you've already gone through the 5 pay. Now you're talking, let's say you haven't asked the question yet. You could tell by their body language they still need a little bit more. So you're talking about the product and stuff. Are the next questions that you're mentioning, are they the questions you kind of, do you skip over the they call it root concern part, and you're starting to close doors for them and ask questions like, okay, cool, you don't need me to sell you the value on these things, and is there an order of the questions you use?
Yeah, so it varies from customer to customer. Sometimes I'm just like silent because I know they're gonna like express a concern, and that's totally fine. Like for me, when a customer gives me an objection, I don't tense up. I'm like, I don't like stress out because I know that's part of the process, right? And so I accept it, and so it's way more fluid. And so sometimes I'm just like silent because I know they're going to express their concern, or I want to see where they're at. Maybe it's hard to read them because they haven't given me any signs. So I'm just going to be silent, and wait for them to like say whatever they're going to say, because whatever they say next is pretty much where their head's at. And then I can take that and move through the process at that point. But there's also been scenarios where I'm like, I go through everything. I'm like, so Daniel, you tell me, like, $500, the 550 a month, is that something you feel like you could fit in the budget if you wanted to? So sometimes the dialogue is like, I'm more so just having to lead through the process, and I need to make sure like they can afford this based on some of the things they've said earlier. Because if they say, no, I can't afford it, I'd be like, hey, no worries, let's look at a smaller option. So sometimes there's not like a clear cut way to do it. I think it's a case by case basis, but those are like a few examples of sometimes allowing the customer to share and just being silent, sometimes kind of moving the needle along a little bit further. And then of course you're still incorporating soft closes like, hey, so great. Here's the tough question. What color do you want? Black? Great. What color? Wood? Honey finish? Awesome. And then for you, would you rather do payments or would you just rather pay it in full? And obviously, when I say that, I know that they're probably going to give me an objection at that point,
Yeah.
which is fine, and that's what I'm doing is like, okay, it's time for the objection. They have to express how they're feeling, but I think the problem to what you were kind of saying is sometimes people ask way too soon, where, you go through the whole pitch and you're like, so you want to go ahead and get it? And it
Spotlight.
creates like this strain and spotlight like on the customer versus like allowing them to like move into it slowly. And so yeah.
Cool. I'll let anyone else ask questions. All right, cool. I get to ask more.
I'm gonna ask one actually.
Go ahead.
It's common at a larger event that's, 10 plus days long for people to be like, oh, you're gonna be here all fair, right? Um, I'll be back kind of thing. What are your ways of handling that particular scenario? Because this is a 13-day event. So, being prepared for getting that objection, especially the first beginning part of the event.
Yeah, it's the same emotional psychological framework as someone who like walks into the first building and is like, oh, I just got here, right? It's the same kind of thing. And so I think it's important, like psychologically, for you to understand, like, that's a reasonable feeling to have. It's not like far-fetched. But I think it's also important to know that the reason they're saying that, why are they saying that? It's because they're not fully convinced they want to buy it, right? At the end of the day.
Right.
So, it's kind of like if you're in a grocery store and you have your list of things you're going to buy, and then you go down an aisle and you see something, you're like, oh, this wasn't on my list, but it would be nice to have. You're not going to be like, oh, well, let me come back and do all the other aisles and then come back and get it. That just seems like a waste of time. At the grocery store, you're just going to grab it,
Yeah.
And so for them, like the reason why they're not pulling the trigger right then and there is because there's something missing for them. Value, affordability, conviction, urgency, something like that. And so the way you handle something like that is like, again, be curious first. Be like, hey, you can totally come back later in the event if you need to. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts so far? And then they tell you. So, oh, I really like it. I think we're going to do it. I just like, it's a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool. Um, you know, and then if they don't give you a clear answer, you can even follow that up with saying like, what's the biggest thing holding you back from wanting to do it now? Or, hey, for you, Denise, what would be the difference between getting it today or getting it a few days from now? And what you're doing is you're again honing in on the objection, the concern, the hesitation. And then once you have clarity of that, because it's not that it's the first day and that they're going to come back later, it's that there's lack of confidence in the decision. And so once you can figure out where the lack of confidence is coming from, then you can address it and then provide urgency or a solution or logic to like help close it. And so sometimes that's like, it depends on like the scenario of like what they say, but you can ask them a question like, after you've like uncovered enough of those layers, if you will, then you can follow that up with a question of like, hey, Denise, if you absolutely need to come back later in the fair, you're more than welcome to, by all means. But from my 15 years of selling Cutco, a lot of times I've had people say that sincerely and something comes up. And it could be a variety of things, whether you don't make it back to the fair, I don't work the day that you come, I get sick, you get sick, like life happens. So typically, whenever I have a customer in front of me, I always try to do what I can to like earn their business because we have each other's undivided attention. So knowing that this is probably something you're going to end up getting at the end of the fair anyways, and you're here now, I just wanted to ask, like, if I went out of my way and did something extra special for you today, just to do it now so it's done and you don't have to worry about it, would you be open to that? And so again, it's the timing of that response, and making sure you've addressed everything else beforehand before saying something like that, to really have the largest impact and the most amount of like, just potency in that situation.
Great. So I know we're over on time. I'm not sure if you're open to letting Daniel ask one more question. It sounded like he had one more.
Yeah.
If it's a quick one, I got you.
It's a quick
Yeah.
one. Okay,
Super
cool.
quick. I know budget has been said by people like to be a negative connotation, and then I have other CSPs who go ahead and are like they'll throw out budget like it's a game show and it's Oprah. You get budget, everyone does. What's your philosophy on that, or do you have alternatives that you sometimes use depending on the customer?
Yeah, I use the word budget. I think Curtis said on like at net that he doesn't like that word. I've never had an issue with it. And I've, sold a good amount using that as a framework. Like, hey, if you really wanted to, could you fit this in the budget? I don't believe personally it's had an impact on my like results or sales. So that's just, different ways to skin a cat, I guess, if you will.
True.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much, Brandon. We appreciate your time and being here for us. And I know that this message is going to have a large impact on our Fresno Fair this year. So thanks again and hope you have a great rest of your day.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hope you guys crush it.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah.